Welcome to Social Work Live at the Columbia School of Social Work. My name is Michael Friedman. I am the host of this show, and every week I get to talk to some very interesting people from the university community, most often about social work practice, but sometimes about some other things as well. And today we have a cross-school program. We have a person who I'll introduce in a minute, from the School of Social Work, and someone from the School of Journalism. So this is going to be an interesting interchange. Our guests today are both students here at the university, but both people of some significant accomplishment already, and we look forward to their having really great careers going forward, and they both have a view that things could be better than they are, which is a good thing for young people to think. And I'd like to think it's true too, even though I'm an older person. So our topic today is the relationship between the field of social work and the field of journalism. On my right is Ali Swensen, who is at the School of Journalism doing a master's program, former editor of her college newspaper, as I recall, and has won some awards along the way, and done a lot of good work in journalism already. And Noah Phillips, who is in my class in mental health policy here at the School of Social Work. So not only has he done some impressive writing, but I know him to be a very smart guy who makes good contributions. So we want to start out with the general question. Both of you think that there could be a better relationship between the fields of social work and journalism, that could be mutually beneficial, and we decided we'd start with you, Noah. What are you thinking?
Basically, I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings on the part of social workers about journalists and vice versa. And the basic premise is that social workers need access to media outlets in order to do their jobs the best way that they can do them, in order to advocate for their clients, advocate for themselves, because we're not chopped liver either, and to have society benefit from our insights, because we're on the front lines of all these really important issues. And journalists on their part, I don't want to speak for you, but need leads and need stories and need content, and social workers can provide that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think oftentimes journalists are trying to get into these agencies, and social workers are the gateway in, and they can be really difficult to navigate. So social workers can help with that. I also think we have a lot of values in common in terms of wanting to hold power to account and give voice to the voiceless.
But you say that journalists want to get into these agencies, I think you said. So which
Sure.
agencies are you talking about, and why do you want to get into them?
Basically any systems of power, whether those are city agencies, state agencies, systems of government. And I think journalists value revealing harm and showing how power is being misused. So, and that's also oftentimes where social workers are working at the same time.
So you're talking about governmental agencies that you're interested in getting access to. And what about to social work agencies, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any systems of power or systems that are dealing with people who are vulnerable in society or who don't already have a voice.
So you're looking I judge from what you're saying, you're looking to reveal something that's not going well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And Noah has just said that social workers in doing their jobs need to have coverage from the media, and I assume you're not talking only about bad coverage.
No,
You're
but
talking about also being able to display the value of what we do.
absolutely. I think by definition, social workers are sent to places where things aren't going great. We're not usually sent to places where everyone's fine, there's no problems, everyone's peachy keen, all the dynamics in the workplace or in the family or whatever are perfect. We're sent to help, not fix issues, because we're not fixers and everyone is their own expert in everything, but to help. And really, I think we're sent to places where there are cracks in the system and where there are fissures in the power structures. And I think those are exactly the places that journalists want to know about.
Again, let me just push this a little bit. The social workers also want good press.
Absolutely.
And there's a difference between a social worker being what's the expression of a person who gives information about the place where they're working. I've just blocked on what it's
A
called.
whistleblower or a
A
positive?
source, a
whistleblower.
whistleblower.
Whistleblower. So there's a difference between being a whistleblower who cooperates with a journalist who's digging to get the truth about something that isn't what it should be, and a person working in an organizational setting who wants to get good publicity.
Well, there's also actually, just to jump in there, I think a whistleblower is at the extreme end of one kind of ways that social workers can talk to journalists. But there's a huge, I mean, a whistleblower, for those who may not know, is just like someone who breaks their agency policies, breaks the rules, or in the case if they're working for the government, like violates confidentiality, like basically sacrifices themselves and their careers and everything in order to get a story out there. But there's a huge amount that social workers can do with journalists that isn't so extreme, isn't like the nuclear option of talking to a journalist. And the other extreme, I think, would be just letting your communications department sort of figure it out. And whenever you come across a journalist saying, "Oh, well, talk to email press at do-goodersinc.org or whatever. I think there's a huge amount in between there. And yes, absolutely, we want good coverage. There's a whole new sort of, I think, wing of journalism that's devoted to solutions journalism.
Yeah, so and solutions journalism, it's not new, but it is gaining traction right now. It's kind of the idea that, yes, we should be revealing problems in society, but at the same time, we shouldn't neglect the fact that there could be solutions or things happening better in other places.
So you are interested in telling some good news about what's going on in the world, as well as...
Absolutely. I mean, we want to reveal the truth of society. And in coupling with showing the bad, I think that means showing when things are being done better, and that actually increases the accountability of the organizations that are doing things badly.
Do you find that there's a lot of interest among editors in doing stories that are about some really good program that out there, in comparison to the interest that there is in some revelation, expose, some revealing some problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think narrowing it down to either it's a positive, light story or it's a negative, bad expose is a little too simple.
Okay. I'm known as a simplistic guy. You can say that. I don't mind.
I mean, I think nobody wants to just publish a fluff piece about, this organization is doing well, because what's that really giving to society? I think you want a story to have all of its context beyond just something that the social worker wants you to say.
I think another place where that can come in is, I think you're right that people like editors want to sell newspapers or whatever it is. I mean, there's conflict or sort of contradiction kind of draws in readers or viewers or whatever it is. Another way that the press can highlight solutions even within that framework is a lot of the times there's a dominant media narrative saying, oh, this agency or this system or this group of people or this whatever it is crappy, isn't working, needs to be destroyed, needs to be defunded, needs to be gotten rid of, and social workers might be working in those environments, saying, no, actually, no, this is working great. Don't cut our funding. Don't do this. I mean, talk about,
or if not great, good enough.
Good enough. You shouldn't cut our funding because that will make it worse. And here's some good work that we're doing.
So, you've started a group here at the School of Social Work, which is a really interesting effort on your part to get social workers interested in working with the media. It's not just the press, but the press is a large part of that. And can you tell us something about the group and how that's going, and how are people responding in it? And
sure, it's actually been a lot of fun. It's sort of one of those ideas that seems like it just kind of like was a no-brainer, and then other people also agreed that it was a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. So it's called the Media and Social Justice Collaborative. We rebranded it from the Media and Social Justice Caucus because it's really more than just a caucus at the social work school. We're trying to broaden it out. And the basic premise is just what we're talking about, that social workers don't know why they should talk to journalists. They don't know, even if they do know why, they don't know how. How to do an interview, what a press release is, what an op-ed is, there's a lot of, I guess, assumptions about the rules about talking to the media, and sort of people sort of assume that it violates confidentiality and so it's not kosher, but I think it is kosher. So there's sort of three parts. One is to give social workers concrete tools in how to talk to the media. So, how to Google for an address for an editor. Another one is just making the case, like we're making today. That is an important thing to do. And then the third one, which is kind of the most fun and satisfying, is just directly connecting social workers and journalists, which at the moment means social work students and journalist students. How we met was, so the caucus, or collaborative, or whatever you want to call it, had like a happy hour, which was like we just mingled. Like we thought that 15 people would come, but like 50 people came. We like.
So that's how you got involved with this, Ali, through
Yeah, so
this collaborative?
Noah reached out at the beginning of the semester to the journalism school, and we had a mixer, and then there was an email list that was sent out, and that's how I got connected with some of the social workers.
So there's a spreadsheet where you can just go on,
Right.
and if you're a social worker, you put your name, you put your contact, you put your interest area, and if you're a journalist or a media worker, you go on and you put your name, and you put your contact, and you put your interest area, and some links to work that you've already done. And you can just look up the other category of person and who's interested in the field that you're interested in, and start a relationship.
Well, it certainly seems to me that having this kind of networking going on can be very valuable on both ends. So social workers, as you say, those certainly who do advocacy or who just want to advertise their work, as particularly administrators need to have good contacts with journalists, and journalists need to have a source of information, so people get to know each other. It seemed to me a lot of informal things could take place that would be valuable to both sides. You've said, Noah, that, and I think you said the same thing, Ali, that there are things that this world of social work is in touch with in our world that could make very good stories, but are not often covered, or not often covered with social workers. So, for example, mental health, which is my field, usually reporters go to psychiatrists or psychologists and only rarely go to social workers. But I think if we could talk about that, maybe the first to start with you, do you have any sense of how journalists perceive social workers and why they don't go to them terribly often?
I think one barrier is exactly what Noah's been saying, which is that I think social workers oftentimes don't know how much they can tell a journalist. So going to a social worker can mean a lot of back and forth, and not being sure whether or not the social worker is going to be willing to talk to them. So it ends up sometimes being more of a hassle than it's worth, especially on deadline.
One person that I heard from who also reached out to me through the spreadsheet about getting connected with some clients, I think got back to me and told me how she used social workers, and I think it's like a perfect case example of how we can be helpful, is she used the social worker to connect her with clients. The social worker didn't say, oh, here's my client's information, but it was a needle exchange program, syringe exchange program, so active drug users. And the social worker was really instrumental to sort of mediating the relationship, because this is a vulnerable population, and they may not trust the media, or they may not have enough distrust of the media. They may not know how to use the media properly. So the social worker introduced them. They were there during the interviews. They helped go over the quotes and make sure that the rules for attribution were there. These are all sort of things that social workers don't really know how to negotiate themselves yet, but they should. This is what we should be learning in our advocacy.
Well, it seems to me that social workers and physicians and others as well often don't understand confidentiality. So it's very important in dealing with the press to respect confidentiality and to respect privacy, and I think that is sometimes a problem, particularly, as you say, if you're on deadline, you got to get this done. You can't wait to work through some of the process that has to go on with that. On the other hand, one of the simple solutions to the problem of confidentiality is to ask the person whether they want to be on, because confidentiality, sorry, I stumbled over that word, confidentiality belongs to the client, not to the professional. And often I have found in the field over the years, professionals are just reluctant to ask the client, well, you do want to do this? And clients often say, yeah, I'm happy to talk to anybody. And, so that's one of the ways in which people could be better informed. I think we have a question, and it's for Noah. how do you think we could engage journalists in trauma-informed practices, such as trauma-informed interviewing, so we avoid re-traumatization when accessing to their life stories?
I think that's another, I mean, I'm assuming that this is a question from a social worker. Although
I would guess. I would guess. Not a journalist question. I don't know. Do you think, Ali?
It could be. I mean, journalists talk about trauma and re-traumatization, secondhand traumatization too.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. So go ahead, Noah. You take it first, and let's give it to Ali.
So I think this is another perfect example of the role that a social worker can play. A social worker can be sitting there, and when you talk to, this is something that social workers I think don't really realize, is that when you talk to a journalist, you get to set the rules. I mean, the terms of engagement. They can choose not to talk to you if your rules are too onerous, but you can say, I'll meet with you if my social worker can be there too, and if they can sort of help me out and answering your questions. So, I mean, one way that we can engage journalists in trauma-informed practices is to be in the room, if that's helpful. But really, it's a question, I mean, my understanding of trauma-informed practice is like you want your client to reclaim power and control over their own story, right? That's a big part of it, at least. And so if they say, I want to talk to a journalist, you might want to say to the journalist, well, all right, just so you know, all right, so I guess this is how I would do it. I'm thinking it through as we go.
All right, but let me interrupt, and I think what you're pointing to is that, in fact, trauma-informed treatment or care is supposed to be strength-based.
Right.
And we sometimes underestimate the strengths of people who have suffered trauma. Mm-hmm. And if somebody, as you are saying, has gone through a terrible experience, but they want to talk about their experience, that can come from strength in them, and it can help them to build strength going forward. Yes. So the notion that we have to protect our clients from being re-traumatized all of the time is something that can go much too far and underestimate the strengths of our clients. And you said that journalists think about this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had plenty of conversations in the past year in the journalism school about the ethics of interviewing somebody who's gone through trauma, and a lot of journalists are concerned about re-traumatizing the people that they're interviewing. So I think social workers maybe can recognize that journalists are thinking about this too. We're careful when we're interviewing sources that we're not, being disrespectful. Minimizing harm is one of our values. So I think it's a practice we're already engaged in.
On the other hand, I watch television.
Well, television journalism can be a different animal.
No offense.
Well, come on. We're on television right now. We're using it to get a message out. But I watch television, and I'm sometimes horrified. Mm-hmm. People have just come out of a burning building. 2 of their children died. And some cameraman gets in their face with the camera, and the reporter says, how do you feel about that? I mean...
So is that responsible journalism?
Is that
No, it's not responsible journalism.
Okay.
Right. I agree. Yeah. I mean, I think just like, not every social worker is necessarily following all of the tenets of social work. Not every journalist or person who calls himself a journalist is, doing best practices.
Right.
I don't think you can assume everybody is.
But that's why we need to be informed about how to tell our clients how to ourselves be able to vet journalists and share that wisdom and those insights with our clients, so that, because I'm sure that there's also hesitancy on the part of journalists to talk, responsible journalists, to talk to really vulnerable clients who've been through a lot of trauma because they don't want to screw up.
Right.
The way that social workers social workers don't want to screw up either. So we can help with that. We can help bridge that gap.
Now, I'm interested in what you're saying, that there's a way of vetting journalists. I think you've both read the section of my manual on social advocacy in which I talk about dealing with the press, and I characterize it as a two-edged sword, because I think there are things that can really be accomplished working positively with the journalists, but I also think that if you're a social advocate, you have to be concerned about where the story is going to go. I don't know if you have any advice to us about how we can exercise some caution.
I'm not totally sure if I understand the question, but I would say, I don't know. I mean, could you rephrase the question? Sorry.
Fair enough. It's probably too difficult a question, and we have another question on the board, but maybe we can talk as we get to it, whether you have any advice for social workers who are nervous about talking with journalists, and they're nervous about talking to journalists for a variety of reasons, some of which may be good reasons and some of which aren't, but any advice for them about how to approach a journalist, how to respond when a journalist calls and says, I'd like to talk to you about such and such?
I think one thing would be learning about journalistic values, so that you kind of have a sense of what journalists are aiming for, and how it's not necessarily just to advance your agenda, but it's to tell the truth of the story with all its context. I think that'd be one important thing.
Also, just read the person's previous work. If they
Yeah.
reach out to you and you read their work, and you can see that they mischaracterize, or they made the clients seem really like victims or really terrible or what, like if they burn their sources, then don't work with them.
And I assume in your group you're talking about this in a bi-directional way, to use a cumbersome word. That is to say, social workers need to learn how to talk to journalists, but also journalists.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think that, I mean, until talking with Noah, I don't think I really understood, and I probably still have a lot to learn about the values of social work.
Symbiosis is the word. Symbiotic is the word I've been using.
A question from Ms. Swensen.
That's me.
Okay, some examples of stories she would like to cover if she had access to social workers.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many so many stories. I mean, I think the big thing is social workers can help get access to places where we don't have access otherwise. And in this year of reporting, I've had situations where I thought, oh my gosh, if I could just get, access to somebody who's experiencing this, then I could tell the story.
Give us an
All right,
example of this.
One example is food insecurity on college campuses. I told a story last semester for one of my audio classes about hunger at NYU. And luckily enough, I happened to find somebody who represented that, but it was a real struggle. And I think a social worker might have been able to help me do that more quickly.
Any other examples? I think it'd be really interesting to the social work community, which I assume is most of our listeners today, to have some ideas about stories that journalists might be interested in. If you can tick any off, I don't want to.
Yeah. I think one thing that's big right now is serious mental illness. So how the state and the country are treating people with serious mental illness. I know deinstitutionalization over the last couple of decades has had some adverse effects. So I think that's something I'm interested in highlighting. Right now I'm working on a story about public libraries and the people who frequent them. I mean, there's endless amounts of stories, and I think it's just about having a conversation.
All right. I'd love to talk to you more about the deinstitutionalization angle, which I think is, we have been, I think, largely unsuccessful in educating the journalistic community about the realities of how the mental health system works and fails to work. But the story that gets told is too often, in my view, the story of, deinstitutionalization was a bad idea and it has failed in a variety of ways. And there are a whole lots of other ways to do that.
Sure.
And I think our field, I'll include you, Noah, you're in the mental health policy class, and you're writing about mental health policy. We've failed to bring the press along to understand it. You were going to jump in with something.
I was going to jump in, so just on the hunger at NYU thing.
Yeah.
My field placement is at a public office, and we have a helpline for constituents, and a couple months ago, I got a call. See, this isn't violating confidentiality, what I'm about to say, but I got a call from a client, or from a constituent, whose son, who lived at a shelter, whose son had been going to NYU on a master's program, but was going to have to drop out because of their situation. So that's an example of something I just sort of took for granted. It's another day at work, and I get a call from someone in a particular situation where that's exactly what could have been helpful. So had I known that she was looking for that sort of thing, I wouldn't have just given her the telephone number. I would have asked the client, there's a journalist looking for a source on this exact subject. Would you like their contact information?
But I think it's interesting what you're saying. We have to take another question, and that is that in social advocacy, what we talk about is generalizing from individual troubles to a larger social issue. And what you're talking about is an example of that. You are dealing with an individual who's got a problem, but it generalizes to a social issue, and it's that's likely to be most interesting, I would think, to the journalists,
Yeah.
getting a sense of a social issue.
I mean, I think journalists want to tell stories, but we also want to make sure that we're doing the reporting to get the context around those stories to figure
Right.
out, is this actually indicative of a societal problem or is this just a one-off?
Right. And you also need to have stories of individuals. When we write as social workers, we very often leave out the case material that leads into it. Most corporations and nonprofits have strict guidelines concerning engaging the media. That's for sure. Most do not allow employees to speak with any form of media reps. Having said that, how do social workers engage socialists if they aren't
Journalists.
allowed? Journalists, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm glad you're
Don't
right.
make any assumptions here.
How do social workers engage journalists if they aren't allowed to?
So
You started to talk about that.
yeah, there's a couple really, I think, straightforward ways. Can I like kind of wrote them down? Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Or is that-
Yeah. We
sort
don't
of
have too
breaking the
much
fourth
time
wall?
left. But
Well, no, I just want to. So one is you can talk to journalists about. So this is the code of ethics, and I went through and I took out all the parts that relate to the media. One is you can talk to journalists about patterns found at your workplace. You can inform your clients that a journalist might be interested in their story, and then give them the journalist's contact information. You can act as a bridge, sort of mediating, the way that I was talking about before with this fringe exchange program. You can call up journalists to talk to them about important policies that are happening that are either in place or that should be in place at the workplace. But I think a really important thing to keep in mind is all this, the Code of Ethics says that we need to advocate and that we have to advocate and be out in public about the issues impacting our clients. And it also says that when our Code of Ethics comes into conflict with the policies of our workplaces, the Code of Ethics trumps. So
then there's the code of how do I keep my job?
which is absolutely legitimate, but a separate
Not
question.
only absolutely legitimate, it's what everybody who's out in the world of work is worried about, because you have a job, you need to make a living, you work in a context which has certain kinds of rules, and this can get really quite difficult. There are organizations where if somebody exercised their duties as a social worker and had independent conversation with the press, they would be, if not out on their butts, pretty close to it, because they have procedures in place that you don't talk to the press without clearing. I think this is a really difficult issue for individual social workers in real situations, working in real jobs, who need to have money to make a living, and where they have to make this kind of tough judgment. There are, I think, organizations that are receptive to social workers doing some of this, but it's tough.
I mean, it becomes a sort of workplace political issue, I think. I mean, in terms of balancing social dynamics and if it's toxic and not toxic. I mean, I would try to make the case that a social worker, that it's without talking to the media, that silencing your employees basically effectively is a sign of a toxic work environment for social workers. I know toxic is sort of a buzzword, but I think that we as social workers, not a social worker, but we as social workers need to be able to talk to the media about our insights, or else we burn out and crumble, and it's bad.
No, I know you've said that before, Noah,
Yeah.
that if we can't talk to the media and tell our stories, that we burn out. It's certainly true that a lot of social workers burn out. I'm not sure whether that's the reason, but do you know of any studies that have been done about that source of burnout?
So self-efficacy is recognized, according to research, as a source of burnout in professional environments.
So it sounds like there's an interesting conversation, we're running out of time, but there's an interesting conversation that should take place between you and administrators as well, and about how they construct their organizations and what kind of access they allow social workers and others who work in their organizations to have to the press. And I'm assuming that you would agree there's also some value to off-the-record conversations that people can have through their networks which Noah and you were starting to build with people.
Sure. I mean, I think off the record is a bit of jargon. I would say journalists are starting to be better about being really clear about what they mean when they say that.
So say something about that, because this is nervous making for some people.
Yeah, I mean,
can I talk to you? Off the record means to me you're not going to use my name going forward.
Well, every news organization has different kinds of codes of ethics about this. So, every reporter is going to be following their own. But the way that we've talked about it in school here is that it's better to not use words like off the record, because that can mean any number of things, but to instead make it very clear, okay, if we talk right now, I'm not going to use your name in this story. I may use some of the information, but I may not use your name. Or I'm not going to use this information in the story at all, but I'm going to use it to guide my future reporting. So I think, we're bound by ethics around anonymity and about off the record, and we're careful about using those tools, but we're willing to in the right situations.
That's interesting to me. I may have to go change my manual, because I tell them, people who read the manual, that they can ask for a conversation off the record, and that means it's really for background.
Well, you can certainly ask, and then maybe, I think, hopefully, you can be very clear with each other about what that means.
Well, that's good advice then, if there's some confusion about what that means. In my time, off the record meant off the record.
Well, and a lot of people use that as well. I mean,
Give your
this is the
background.
problem, right? I mean,
Yeah.
people use off the record on background all the time.
Or on deep background.
Right.
Or to say, look, I'm happy to talk to you, and you can quote me, but not for attribution,
Right.
which is another.
There's all
Right.
kinds of layers about it, yeah.
Yeah, all right, but from what you're saying, it's a little less clear than I thought it was, and that it may be important to have a conversation to be clear about this, if you're concerned about your comments
Yeah.
being attributed to you in some way.
I
that you
think
don't
most
want.
news organizations would say off the record means not for publication,
Not for publication, right.
but I don't think it's safe to assume anything.
Interesting. That's very interesting. We have one more question, and then we're going to close out. Any idea to offer a joint degree between journalism and social work? Why isn't there one? Well, it's not fair to ask you why there isn't one. But we can ask you, what do you think? Would it make sense to have a joint degree of journalism and social work?
There's a joint degree of journalism and law. There is a joint degree of journalism and business. I think the two fields have a lot of things in common. They also have a couple points of tension. It would be interesting to see what a program like that looked like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure whether or not it's feasible.
That's
Maybe though.
interesting. And
I think there might be something at the heart of social work that's sort of like the advocacy question, and being an advocacy journalist is like something that journalists don't really want to be pegged as. There could be. I think we just need to do a better job of learning advocacy in our current setup. I don't know that we need a whole new degree. I think we just need to do a better job of implementing the stuff that we have.
Yeah, one of the things that I think would be very useful are the creation of any number of data banks, as I tend to call them. That is to say, particularly online sources of information. You're particularly interested, you said, in mental health policy.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one online data bank in mental health policy, and it happens to come from sort of the right wing of mental health policy makers. And journalists rely on it. Much of the information is pretty solid, but some of it is distorted, and the overall tilt is in a particular direction. There ought to be another one that provides information. But I think in a lot of fields, journalists desperately need information, real data, and it's very hard to find it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And any piece of data that's online too, we have to go through extra steps of reporting to verify that.
right.
So,
Well, I think we're done for today. I want to thank both of you for coming on. Ali, it was lovely to meet
Thank
you.
you so much
and
for having me.
Thank you for being here. Noah, I'll see you in class later.
In an hour, yep.
That's right. I hope we'll both be awake and ready to
I'll probably
do that. Well,
I'll
more-
probably still have some adrenaline going.
So again, thank you both for coming. We'll be back next week when we're going to have a conversation with about using contemporary media in the pursuit of social justice, and we're going to have some very interesting examples of how that can be done. We hope you will see us next week. Thank you.